of the Omo Valley region, the oldest modern humans, 195,000 years old, coming up out of this region, as I said, migrating around the world from the early documentation that we see here today.
This is the Japan Times, May 12, 2001. DNA evidence backs up out of African human origin theory. Genetic research unveiled Thursday provides compelling support for the theory that autonomously modern humans rose up out of Africa in the past 1,000 years and swept aside populations of prehistoric man with no interbreeding. A team of Chinese and American geneticists obtained blood samples from more than 12,000 men from across East Asia and examined characteristic DNA sequences called markers on the Y chromosome.
So going back to the history, what is the connection between India and Africa? So I'm trying to bridge the gap. There is a distinct and clear connection between the ancient India and the ancient Africa. And that is where I want to go back to the Indus Valley civilization. I think most of you would have heard that or maybe would have studied in school, which is as ancient as the Egypt Nile Valley civilization. The original inhabitants or the original creators of the Indus Valley civilization, which is also called Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, or Harappan civilization, was created by the black man. People came from Africa. About 7,000 BC, which is 9,000 years back, maybe even earlier than that. They brought agriculture, they domesticated most of the animals, they were highly civilized. They had two-story buildings, sanitation systems, sewage system. They had a built-in screening system in the sewage so the solids would not block the liquid passage. They had chutes so they can drop the garbage from the upper level to lower levels. They had individual wells. They had courtyards. Highly civilized conditions they were living. They're very peaceful agricultural people. Very well flourishing civilization. This is the original black people.
They were an African group who had left Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, the Nile Valley. They went there with Thutmose III, and before Thutmose III, with other conquering people. They remain in India today, remnants of their families. They are called DRAVIDIANS, Tamils, and other such names, including untouchables.
India used to be called, long time ago, Eastern Ethiopia.
As I said, the worship there was the worship of goddess Het-Heru, or otherwise Hathor, who was symbolized as an African woman with the ears of a cow, or shown as a cow. For those of you who have been to Egypt, at Abu Simbel, you saw her shown in the temple of Nefertari. You saw her at the funerary temple of Makari Hatshepsut, at the Valley of the King. You saw her in Dendera, in a temple built to honor Hathor. You saw her the most expressed. And you saw her in many other temples throughout Egypt, because in every temple there's got to be at least one reference to goddess Hathor, called Het-Heru. That African woman, or goddess, was worshipped by every people who had contact with the Africans of ancient times before the Common Era.
And the best known of the goddess was the goddess Hathor. And that her influence was so great that it spread to Asia, and the concept of the sacred cow in India came from an aspect of the religion of Hathor. And when you see her drawn in history, you will see a female with a cow's body. It was the sacredness of this image that gave them the concept of the sacredness of the cow. And that this is part of the Hindu religion. This is part of where the sacred cow concept came.
The worship of the golden calf that is in India. It comes from the worship of Heru that was taken into India by Asa and the Nile Valley Africans, the Ethiopians, that moved into that realm and started the Indian Kushite, Hindu Kushite civilization. This BBC documentary tells us about the great dwarf deities of Egypt, Bes and Ptah. Here is two deities, the two earliest deities of Egypt, Ptah and Bes. Now, you can even see Bes, which is a Twa, the lion was sacred to Bes. Now, if that's in India, that's, I think, what's that deity's name? I think it might be Kali. Okay. Now, you see the lion right there now. See, that's the symbolisms of Bes. You got to understand that's Bes. How did it get in India? How did it get into India? So how can he say Asia brought anything into Africa when we can clearly show we took it there? Now this is an image of Osiris, Asar, that is in the Louvre Museum. Look at this face. It is truly African. Now this right here is Diodorus Siculus. He's a Greek. Lived around the 1st century AD. And he has some choice words about Africa that we need to take into consideration. Now, this is what he said. What this Greek historian says about his Osiris. He says, Osiris, being come to the borders of Ethiopia, raised high banks on either side of the Nile, lest in the time of inundation it shall overflow the country more than was convenient. Now, did what he said. Thence he passed through Arabia, bordering upon the Red Sea as far as India, and the utmost coasts that were inhabited. He built likewise many cities in India. So here we dealing with an African deity, which this Greek historian in the 1st century AD states that the African blacks, the man and woman, had taken civilization all the way into the extremities of India. Okay, one of which he called Nasser, willing to have a remembrance of that in Egypt where he was brought up. At this Nasser in India, he planted ivy, which grows and remains here only for all other places in India or the parts adjacent. He left likewise many other marks of his being in those parts, by which the latter inhabitants are induced to believe and do affirm that this god was born in India. Now in India, Osiris is Krishna. He's Krishna. He's also Buddha. Okay? Many people don't understand that these people never really lived. They are all mythological stories. Okay? And they all came into Egypt to study. And when they left and went back home, they wrapped their own personal culture around these stories. That's right. But Buddha, Krishna, all of these are representations of Osiris. The Greek historian is relating to us the information of this black god, Asar, who had educated even the Indian. And that god Asar became Krishna in the Indian realm. And you see that the Indians paint themselves black to remember the great god Asar. Krishna means black in Sanskrit. It means black. And this is where the Ethiopians who created the Hindu Kush civilization in that area came from up out of the Nile. So we have to understand that all of these civilizations are given birth to by the Nile Valley Africans.
This is a Muslim merchant in India.
C'est un marchand musulman en Inde.
This image is only 400 years old.
Cette image n'a que 400 ans d'âge.
And this shows the different groups of black people who went into Asia, who went into India in ancient times. This brother is called a CD.
Donc ce frère est appelé Sidi.
Not the compact disc CD.
Il ne s'agit pas du compact disque.
That is the name of the people.
Non, mais les gens, son peuple s'appelait les Sidi.
And they say that they remember Africa.
Now this piece right here, this is a beautiful slide, and this is of another group of folk that I've really fallen in love with in terms of the Indian experience. These people are sometimes called scheduled tribes, or sometimes simply tribal people or tribals, and sometimes they're called Adivasis, A-D-I-V-A-S-I-S. And these are the indigenous people of India. Most of the time I talk about the black untouchables, sometimes called outcasts or Dalits. But these people, more than anybody else, represent the first people on Indian soil. And this particular sister, beautiful sister, is from a group called the Santals, S-A-N-T-A-L-S. And they live in eastern and northeast India. There's about 10 million of them. Next. Focus it. These black people here that you don't see driving the taxis back and forth from Manhattan to LaGuardia, you see a different kind of Indian. They represent the indigenous people, and we had an opportunity to visit them. Let me just show you 2 or 3 of these slides. And again, these are more tribal people, and you can see how black this brother was on the other side of me. He's from a group called the Munda, M-U-N-D-A. And we were met by, in this community, a group called the Munda, the Oran, and the Santals. And this, at that time, was the blackest human being I'd ever seen.
The Aborigines are famous for their tradition of oral history. They call them songlines, and they tell the story of their beginnings passed down by word of mouth through the generations. Perhaps there's something in their songlines that hints at a journey. The Aborigine songlines say that mankind originated here in Australia, no stories about journeys. But the blood of Aborigines tells me that they've inherited a very ancient marker from Africa. It's around 50,000 years old, while Africans have no trace of Aboriginal markers in their blood. The human traffic was strictly one way, from Africa to Australia. The big question is, what route did they take? 50,000 years ago, the Ice Age had locked up the world's water. Sea levels were lower, making Indonesia one landmass. Australia was joined to New Guinea. Since then, rising sea levels have covered up any trace of their presence along this route. If these first African migrants traveled this road, then their genes and the elusive Australian marker might survive somewhere. I'm going to India to see if I can find any genetic trace of the Africans en route to Australia. If I can, it'll be the first direct evidence that native Australians came this way. I'm looking for the genetic marker found today in Australian Aborigines that shows their ancestors traveled through India on their journey to their new home.
Let's get on that. Given what you know about the people living in southern India, which population should we sample?
Yes, there are many.
As we worked out which villages to test, the full reality of our experiment hit me. We were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of India, but Professor Pitchapan was upbeat. The following day, I set out to sample an isolated village west of Madurai. This is exactly the sort of thing Luca started doing all those years ago. These villagers are a prime sampling group. They've lived in this region for generations with few outsiders marrying in. The more indigenous and isolated these people are, the easier it should be to find the ancient marker. Somewhere here, 50,000 years after his journey, I hope to find the marker of the ancestral grandfather of the Aborigines. If the marker's here, it'll give itself away as a tiny spelling mistake in just one of the 4 letters that spell out the story of our past. A-C-G-T.
I've got some really exciting news.
Oh, good.
Let's take a look at it. I'll show you.
Yeah.
If you look at this particular position, see that change from C to T?
T, yes.
That's the marker.
We've done it. This tiny spelling mistake occurred around 2,000 generations ago. It proves that our African ancestors did pass through here on their way to Australia. In the end, one man from a small village west of Madurai had the answer. It had been passed down to him from the very first humans to set foot in India. And here he is. From Africa to Australia, and now, for the first time, the missing link we found in India. The genetic evidence of modern man's first coastal migration to Australia.
discoveries have convinced me that these Aboriginal Australians, just like me, are descendants of that small group who left Africa. And that they really could have reached Australia by around 60,000 years ago.
Now this takes us to Fiji. That's a nice slide, isn't it? Beautiful sister. In fact, the sisters are not only beautiful, but extremely friendly. And virtually all the sisters look like that. I didn't hardly see any black women. It was refreshing, but the brothers were very friendly too. And the brothers were known as ferocious warriors. They were never defeated in battle. And all of them I talked to, from the brother on the corner to the college professor, they all say they came from Africa, and they said it with great pride.
Coming into the South Pacific, in the South Pacific, there's no distinction. Here are the people. Now you tell me which one is a Hawaiian, Papua New Guinean, Fijian. They're all the same. But what they will do is they'll take this group and say they're Melanesian. This group is Polynesian and this is Micronesian, to confuse you. But this is what they saw. And notice, you run the full spectrum. Thick nose, thick lips, thin nose, thin lips. Long, stringy hair, slick hair, woolly, kinky hair. You name it, it's there. No distinction. Showing you Papua New Guinea. South Pacific is probably the second richest area in the world minerally. South Pacific, African people. These are large islands, okay, army, etc. Now we're in the South Pacific formally. Here's a short-statured African, right? The Hutu or the Twa in Papua New Guinea. You'll see them also as negritos or little blacks in southern Philippines. Solomon Islands, some of the blackest of people. There's a genetic variation in us in the South Pacific of having your hair naturally blonde. This is the Maori. So that in case you want to get a clear idea of who the people are of New Zealand, they say, well, the Maori people are Polynesian. They have nothing at all to do with you. The indigenous Australian, calling themselves Karen people, their folklore says they come from Madagascar and Africa. These are the brothers and sisters who are going to show up in the folklore of one of these countries in the North Pacific. Here's indigenous people. They're still there.
Always been people who were lighter skinned and straighter haired from 60,000 years ago. Always. They're not new. That's my whole point. In fact, I could make the argument that those kinds of characteristics actually originated in Africa. Yeah, that they didn't come from someplace else. Yeah. They're part of modern humanity, or they're part of humanity. And there's no reason to believe that they could not have originated in Africa.
See right here, these are DRAVIDIANS. These are DRAVIDIANs. They're black. But the one thing about them that's significant is they got straight hair. Okay? They got straight hair. The straight hair Indian was the first mutation from the original gene, was the woolly hair. Talk to me. This is the original. And the first mutation was the straight hair. Okay? Watch me now. How do we know that? When you look at the deities, which is Buddha, he got woolly hair. He don't have straight hair. Okay? That lets you know who the original man in Asia was. All right? You look at the deity will tell you that they were the ruling class. You see that, brother? You gotta see that black corner hair? That's the same hair right there. I ain't do. Two steps. The original Indians were woolly hair Africans. Believe it or not. Now what you're looking at is an albino Dravidian. He's actually not a Caucasian. That is an albino Dravidian. Oh, we looking at some shit. Nah, we looking at some shit. See this? Albino Dravidian, the source of the Caucasian. I'm gonna catch a lot of flack for this shit. But I'm about to prove it now. I'm backing it up. See the woolly hair African? That's right. Even though he's albino, he still got woolly hair. He ain't got straight hair. Like that one, he's got woolly hair. What the other? Okay. Now you can see this one. He still got melon. See, he still got melon. And you can tell, you can see the African in his face. You can see the African in his face, but he's an albino. Okay. The albino Dravidian produced the white race. You can look at the hair. You can look at the hair. It's a mutation that took place between this one and this one, but come from the albino Dravidian. I'm gonna back it up. Now, when you look at this Indian, this Dravidian,